Welcome back to the You Can Too podcast. On today's show, we have Nir Eyal on the show. He's wrote multiple books that you've probably heard of. For those who may not be aware of who you are, Nir, can you give us a brief overview of you and kind of what got you into this space to begin with?
Sure. So I am what you call a behavioral designer. So I help companies build the kind of products and services that improve people's lives by building healthy habits. So I primarily do a lot of work with industry in the health tech space, in the fintech space, in the ed tech space. So helping people build healthy habits around various services. For example, helping people learn a new language by building a habit with a language learning app, or exercising, building a habit through an app like Fitbod, or building wealth through a financial services product. So any kind of product that requires a habit utilizes the work that I did in my first book called Hooked: How to Build Habit Forming Products. And then my second book, Indestructible, is about the other side. If Hooked is about how to build good habits, Indestructible is about how to break those bad habits, primarily those habits that lead us towards distraction. And it's not a negation, it's an expansion. So I wrote Hooked so that we can build the kind of products that get us hooked to healthy habits, and Indestructible to break the bad ones. Of course, it's not the same thing, right? We want to get hooked to the language learning app or the fitness app, and we also want to break our bad habits when it comes to the distracting products and services like watching too much news, too much Facebook, too much whatever.
Yeah. And I'm glad that you bring up that they're different, right? And I think for a lot of us, like when we think habits, we think both, like the positive and the negative, and we don't really find the difference between both of them. Like, what prompted you to jump into this space? Because I feel like this is so much of our life, is our habits and what we do every single day. So like, what was it? What was the moment in time where you pivoted into this space and thought, I want to dedicate my life to this, really?
Well, I wish I could tell you I had a master plan. I didn't. I was building tech companies, and the last of which was in the gaming and advertising space. And I could see many of my clients, their businesses kind of came and went. And I wanted to try and figure out why. Why was it that some companies were super successful and could keep their customers coming back and satisfied, and they were making money and they were doing right by investors? And yet other companies were kind of flashes in the pan. They would raise a bunch of money from investors and then they'd burn it all away because they couldn't get customers to come back. And so I wanted to figure out what was the difference between those two kinds of companies. And when I looked for a book on this topic, I didn't find one. So I started researching and writing and really delving deep into the deeper psychology around why a product can get us hooked. And then the idea was, how can I democratize what I learned so that everybody out there building products and services can use the secrets of the social media companies, the gaming companies, the advertisers? Why should these secrets just be kept in with those companies? What if we could all use those secrets to get people hooked to healthy habits in their lives? And so that's kind of where that happened. I started blogging and writing about it, and then later I was invited to teach a class at the Stanford Graduate School of Business, and then later after that at the Hasselplattner Institute of Design. And so it just kind of became a natural evolution. I didn't set out to be a writer. I was frankly just chasing my own curiosity because I wanted such a book to exist and I couldn't find it. So I decided to write it for myself. And then Indestructible, same story. I found that I was getting increasingly distracted. The more successful I became as an author, I had more opportunities for consulting and speaking and investing. And it was difficult for me to stay focused, and I found that was taking a toll on my health. I wasn't exercising when I said I would. I wasn't fully present with my family when I said I would be, and I wasn't professionally doing what I wanted to do as well. I kept getting distracted by trivialities, and so that's when I really decided that I wanted to understand the psychology of distraction, and decided to really kind of focus on that topic.
Yeah, I love that when a lot of authors, like, they solve their own problems with their books, and then that leads into solving so many problems for so many other people because it resonates in so many different ways. And I believe we have this belief that it's all external, that the problems are our environment, it is other people, it is our schedules, all of that kind of stuff. But as we both know, it's a lot more internal than it is the external. So I'm curious, like, what are some things that are going on inside that we're not really noticing or we're not really aware of, that are stopping us from showing up for the things that we say that we want to show up for?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is critical to both building good habits and breaking bad habits. Specifically, when it comes to the products we design for folks, is understanding what we call internal triggers. So internal triggers, as opposed to external triggers, are these uncomfortable emotional states that we seek to escape. And we know that when it comes to distraction, 90% of our distractions, 90%, 90, come not from outside of us. It's not the pings, the dings, the rings. It's about what's happening inside of us. It's about these internal triggers, these uncomfortable emotional states,
Mhm.
boredom, loneliness, fatigue, uncertainty, anxiety, stress. This is what we are looking to escape from. And so this is a really critical lesson when it comes to if you're struggling with procrastination, if you're struggling with distraction, and frankly, who isn't, right? Everybody today is struggling with those things.
Oh yeah.
uh, so the place to start is not with the external triggers. They do play a factor, but only about 10%. The other 90% is about mastering these internal triggers, or they will become your master. So both on the side of our own behaviors when it comes to making sure we stay on track, when we make sure that we can have the kind of lives we know we deserve, understanding those internal triggers so that we can control them and help them serve us as opposed to us serving them is absolutely critical. From the business side, if you're building a product or service, it's imperative that you realize that there's only one reason and one reason only that people use any product or service. Any product or service, right? Like, let's back up here and talk about motivation. Motivation is one of these things that a lot of people think they understand. We've all heard this metaphor of carrots and sticks, right? That it's all about the pursuit of pleasure and the avoidance of pain. Turns out neurologically, that is not true. That we do not do what we do solely for the pursuit of pleasure and the avoidance of pain. It's actually just one of those things. Everything we do is for one reason and one reason only, and that is the desire to escape discomfort. It's almost like, remember that scene in The Matrix where Neo is told that there is no spoon?
Mhm.
And so I'm going to give you another Matrix moment here, that the carrot is the stick. The carrot is the stick. Everything you do, every product you use, every click, everything you respond to, fundamentally you are doing because of a desire to escape discomfort, which actually makes things pretty easy. And from a behavioral design perspective, of course, it's complex in execution, but simple in understanding. That if you can design systems to deal with discomfort, there's nothing you can't accomplish that doesn't violate the laws of physics, right? That fundamentally, why don't we achieve our goals? What's the number one reason we don't achieve our goals? The number one reason people don't achieve their goals, whether that's personal, professional, physical, whatever it might be, the number one reason, they quit. They quit. And that's not to say that quitting is a bad thing. Sometimes the right thing to do is to quit. There's nothing wrong necessarily with quitting. It's just a fact. The number one reason we don't achieve our goals is we quit. Why do we quit our goals? We quit our goals because the number one reason, there are many reasons, but the number one reason is we don't feel like pursuing them,
Yeah.
right? It's a feeling. Because again, the reason we do anything and everything is about the desire to escape discomfort. I don't feel like going to the gym today. I don't feel like eating right. I don't feel like doing the work I need to do. I don't feel like whatever it is, right? It's all about mastering a sensation. To me, that's incredibly empowering, right? Because as opposed to blaming Zuckerberg and the news and your boss and your kids and all the things that are happening in the world, it's much more empowering to actually look at what you can actually affect. And that thing that you can affect is, of course, how you feel. And that, of course, has the biggest impact on the life you live.
I love it. I think it's so important that you bring up the blaming, because a lot of the time, right, we have phones with us at all times. It is so insanely captivating to want to go to your phone and to immediately click as soon as you wake up, to skip the gym, to skip all the things that we know that are so important to us. And it is really a decision. I always say that change is a decision before it becomes a process, and you have to
Mm.
consciously decide to make that choice. So when we are in that moment of, okay, I'm deciding if I want to go to the gym or if I want to do this other thing or whatever that comes down to, really just choosing the positive route over the route that's not going to serve us in the long run. How do we gain more, I guess, consciousness in those moments of, I guess, distractions really pulling us, if that makes sense?
Absolutely. So maybe it's a good idea to back up and really talk about what distraction is and is not. All right. The best way to
Yeah.
understand if you really know something is to ask yourself, do you know the opposite of the thing? What's the
Mhm.
antonym? So, what's the opposite of distraction? Most people will tell you the opposite of distraction is focus, but
Mhm.
that's not exactly right. The opposite of distraction is not focus. The opposite of distraction is traction. Of course it is, right? Think about it. Traction and distraction, they're opposites. Both words come from the same Latin root, trahare, which means to pull, and they both end in the same six letters, ACTION, reminding us that distraction is not something that happens to us. It is an action that we ourselves take. So
Mhm.
traction, by definition, is any action that pulls you towards what you said you were going to do, things that move you closer to your values and help you become the kind of person you want to become. Those are acts of traction. The opposite of traction, distraction, is any action that pulls you further away from what you said you were going to do, further from your goals, further from your values, further from becoming the kind of person you want to become. So this isn't just semantics. This is super important because I would argue that any action can be traction or distraction based on one word. And that one word is intent. Dorothy Parker said, the time you plan to waste is not wasted time. So I think we need to stop moralizing and medicalizing perfectly normal behavior and stop making people feel ashamed and
Yeah.
guilted about going on Facebook or Instagram or TikTok or Netflix or sports. It's all fine. There's nothing wrong with it, people. You're free now to do the things you like to do. Don't let people tell you that somehow playing video games is, less morally okay than watching sports on TV. Can someone tell me the difference? There's no difference. It's just that old crotchety people don't like this newfangled technology and they think it's melting kids' brains because that's what they always say, right? People said this about the television. They said it about the radio. They said it about the written word. Socrates talked about how terrible this technology of the written word was going to enfeeble men's minds. There is nothing wrong with the technology, right? If you use it on your schedule and according to your values, not someone else's. So if you want to watch Netflix, if you want to play video games, if you want whatever you want to do it, but do it according to your schedule with intent and according to your values, certainly not the tech company's values. So those are acts of traction. Conversely, anything can be distraction. So just because something is a work-related task doesn't mean it's not a distraction. In fact, I would argue that is the most dangerous form of distraction, is the distraction that tricks you into prioritizing the urgent and the easy work at the expense of the hard and important work we have to do to move our lives and careers forward. So just because it's a work-related task doesn't mean it's not a distraction. That's the most pernicious form of distraction. Let me give you an example. For years, I would sit down at my desk and I would say, okay, I've got that big project to do right now. I got to stay focused. I've got to make sure I don't get distracted. Here I go. I'm going to get started. But first, let me check some email first, right? Let me just scroll those Slack channels. Let me just check on the news real quick in my industry to make sure I'm all up to date. Those are work-related tasks. I got to get those things done anyway, right? But what I didn't realize is that if it wasn't what I said I was going to do ahead of time, it was by definition a distraction. So that turns out to be, it's not video games and Facebook that are distracting people. By and large, what's distracting folks is the stuff they think is important that they didn't need to do in the first place, or at least not do right now.
Yeah.
So that is the much more dangerous form of distraction. So now we've got traction, we've got distraction. Now we can include the triggers we talked about earlier. We've got
Yeah.
internal triggers and external triggers. So now we've got our model that we can use to become indestructible. And we can use that model by working through clockwise each of these 4 points on this indestructible model, starting with mastering the internal trigger. That's the most important first step. Then making time for traction. We can talk about how to do that.
Yeah.
Hacking back the external triggers, that 10% of triggers that occur from outside of us. That's, it's not the majority of the problem, but it's something we do need to think about and have a plan in place for. And then finally, preventing distraction with pacts. And if you just do one small thing in each of these 4 categories, you will find you will start walking this path to becoming indistractable, and you will change your life.
I love it. The idea of productive procrastination, right? Focusing on the little things that we have to get done, right? They're the maintenance tasks that you have to do. You have to check Slack, you have to check your email, you have to get back to these things, but they're not the most important thing. And making sure that you do them later and putting the most important work first is so important. I'm so glad that you bring that up. I would love to jump through all 4 of these steps because I think there is not there's no way around doing part of it. It has to be all 4. So if you wouldn't mind, I would love for you to jump through all 4 of them.
Sure. Yeah. Let's talk through them real quick and then we can dive deeper in any area that's particularly interesting. So, step number 1,
Yeah.
mastering the internal triggers. Again, if you don't master these internal triggers, they will become your master. So, you need to know what to do with that discomfort. Remember, time management is pain management. I'll say that again. Time management is pain management. Why? Because as we talked about earlier, all human behavior is spurred by a desire to escape discomfort. All human
Mhm.
behavior. So that must therefore mean that not only is time management pain management, weight management is pain management, money management is pain management. It's all pain management, right? That it's all about impulse control. That's fundamentally what procrastination is all about. It's not that you're morally flawed. It's not that you're broken in some way. So you probably don't need medication. Very, very few people actually need any kind of medication. It's single digit percentages of people who actually have a disorder like ADHD. The vast majority of people, we think something like 97% of people, nothing wrong with you. You don't
Yeah.
need medication. You just need a way to manage discomfort. The antidote, this is one of the key lessons from the book. It's a mantra I repeat every day. The antidote to impulsiveness is forethought.
Yeah.
I'm going to say that again. The antidote to impulsiveness is forethought. That if you plan ahead, there is no distraction that you can't overcome. Then when people say, "Oh, I can't stop getting distracted," right? So, well, tell me. Well, maybe James, let's make this very personal for the listeners. Is there anything that you struggle with as a distraction that maybe I can help you with? You can be our patient zero here.
I think sometimes on I work online, so social media is my business, quote unquote. And
Right.
going on social media, trying to do my work, whether it's outreach or posting or anything like that, it's really, really easy to get caught into scrolling and not consciously doing it. And after 10 minutes goes by, I realize I'm in a scroll when I really should be doing my work.
Absolutely. Very, very common, especially with people who are constantly online for their jobs, which is why I wanted to give readers a tech positive approach. Because listen, James, if you read most of the books out there on distraction, they tell
Mhm.
you the same story. Stop using technology. It's technology's fault, right? Go on a digital detox. Throw away your smartphone.
Yeah.
That's the kind of advice only a tenured professor would give.
Yeah.
Because thanks, stupid, I can't do that. I'm going to get fired from my job. Right? Like, how do you tell a guy like you, stop using social media? That's your livelihood. That's dumb advice. You're not going to have a
Yeah.
living. So that's why I try and give people a tech positive approach. So let's deal with this problem, starting with these internal triggers. Let's first start with the most important thing people can do for themselves, which is to believe that they are not powerless. If you listen to the media narrative out there, if you
Yeah.
watch these stupid movies like The Social Dilemma or read these books, there's a book called Stolen Focus, right? Just the title tells you everything you need to know. These companies are not stealing your focus. We're giving it away. They don't have to. Stealing is when someone comes into your house, breaks your window, and steals stuff from you. No, we are giving these companies our time and attention. They're not stealing it. So the most important thing is to believe that you are not powerless. Why? Because the vast majority of people out there, and I really do believe the world is bifurcating into people who decide for themselves, I will control my time and attention. I will be indistractable, and people who say, sure, take my time, take my attention. I don't want it. Right. And so if you are not one of those people who decides to be indistractable, you're going to be a sucker because there are too many interests out there who are really good at monetizing your eyeballs. They want your time and attention, and they're not going to tell you to stop. And it's not just social media companies. The New York Times, right? The national paper of record, Fox News, CNN, they're never going to tell you, hey, buddy, you've had enough time. Go have a life. Stop being a news junkie, right? They're never going to tell you that. So,
Yeah.
nor will the social media companies. Of course, all forms of media want as much attention as they possibly can get from you, and don't let the sanctimonious New York Times tell you that because they're always beating up on social media. They're in the same exact business. They
Yeah.
all want to monetize your attention to sell to advertisers. That's their business model. And there's nothing necessarily wrong with that. We just need to understand what's going on. And once we do, we can use these amazing services and products for our advantage as opposed to being enslaved by them. So once you realize that you have agency, that you have power here, let's realize that and let me prove it to you, by the way. I hear a lot of people say, yeah, but that's easier said than done. How can I do that? It's impossible, right? And then I say, well, let me ask you something. Let's raise the stakes for a second. If I said, hey, James, if you made a schedule for your week ahead that said you will only scroll social media for fun, 5 hours this week, and if
Mhm.
you go a second over 5 hours, you're going to have to pay me $10,000, right? Do you think you'd go over that time?
No, of course not.
Not a chance. Not a chance, right? And when people say, "Oh yeah, but you don't understand. I'm struggling with this, that, the other, my family, my kids, my trauma, this, that," and I said, "Okay, well, some people this is true. Some people, people who have OCD, for example, it doesn't matter what amount of money you give them. It's really outside their control. They can't, even if it put a gun into their head, they can't." And if you're that kind of person, my book's not for you. That's medical grade type stuff. That's not for you. But
Yep.
99% of the population we just make excuses for ourselves. We tell ourselves we can't. But when we actually do this gun to the head test, or even the money in the bank test, and say, whoa, for
Yeah.
$10,000, you know what? I wouldn't use TikTok all day, right? No problem if the stakes are high enough. So the lesson here is we've established you can control distraction. Now we're just arguing about the price,
Mhm.
right? So realizing you can is the most important step. Now, when you realize, hey, I can do something about this. I'm not going to be part of this victim army that we like to perpetuate in the media. The media loves to tell you how powerless you are. I'm not
Yeah.
going to buy that. I'm going to do something about it. The first step is to make sure you master these internal triggers. So there are over a dozen different techniques that you can use. None of them I invented. These are all very well researched techniques from acceptance and commitment therapy, from cognitive behavioral therapy, a dozen different techniques that you can use right away with good, solid scientific research. Just a side note, I read a lot of books and I hate reading these books that say, hey, here's my miraculous technique that I invented. Works for me, it's going to work for you. That's very nice, but that's not good enough. I
Yeah.
want to see peer reviewed studies. And so in Indestructible, you will see there are 30 pages of citations to peer reviewed studies. So I give you these techniques that you can use right now to start mastering these internal triggers. We can talk about some of those as well. So that's step number one. Step number two is to make time for traction. Very important. If you don't plan your day, somebody's going to plan it for you.
Mhm.
And you cannot call something a distraction unless you know what it distracted you from. I'm going to say that again. You cannot call something a distraction unless you know what it distracted you from. So if you haven't planned your day, you have no right to complain. Because what did you get distracted from? There's nothing on your schedule. So keeping a to-do list is not good enough. To-do lists are one of the worst things you can do on their own for your personal productivity. You have got to start keeping a time box calendar. And this is the most studied technique that we have. Thousands of peer-reviewed studies have found that the simple act of planning out what you're going to do and when you're going to do it is incredibly beneficial. Now, most people out there would much rather complain. They'd much rather moan and groan as opposed to taking 15 minutes and saying, how do I want to spend my time according to my values? Now, it sounds like an onerous task, but I'm telling you, I can show you in just a few minutes, right? Maybe 30 minutes, how to figure out what are your values and how you can turn those values into time. If you want to know what somebody's values really are, you don't ask them, you don't listen to the words coming out of their mouth. You look at how they are spending their time and how they're spending their money. That's how you figure out what somebody's values really are. Because we can all talk a good game. Time and money is how we actually express our values in the world. So I want to see on your calendar, what are your values? If you say, oh, family, very important. Friends, oh, super important. My health, so important. Sleep, very important. Is it on your schedule? If it isn't, those really aren't your values, or at least you're not expressing your values. And here's what's going to happen. Fast forward a year, 5 years, 10 years, a lifetime, you're going to look back and you're going to regret the life you lived because you didn't live your life according to your values. That's what I want to help you prevent. By the way, I don't care how you spend your time. If you say, hey, according to my values, I want to play video games all day. Awesome. There are professional video game players out there who make a wonderful living playing video games all day. If that's according to their values, more power to them. Wonderful. So it's not about saying, oh, this behavior good, this behavior bad. No, no, no. It's about, is that behavior consistent with
Mhm.
my values? What are values? Values are defined as the person attributes of the person you want to become. Values are defined as attributes of the person you want to become. So that's how we define our values. And we can walk through a little exercise if you'd like on how to figure out what your values are and how you can turn them into time. The next step, the third step, is about hacking back these external triggers. So this is where we go into the nuts and bolts of all the pings, the dings, the rings. How do we hack back our phones? How do we hack back social media, Slack notifications, but also the non-technological distractions? Meetings. How many of us are subjected to stupid meetings that are nothing more than a distraction? Tons of time is spent on dumb meetings that didn't need to be called in the first place. How can you start hacking back those silly meetings that didn't need to be called? So we work through all of these external triggers. Then finally, we prevent distraction with pacts. And this is where we erect a firewall against distractions so that if all else fails, we have a last line of defense against distraction. So I teach you exactly how to erect these pacts so that when push comes to shove, if you forget and you get distracted, how do you make sure that you can not only keep distractions out, but how do you keep your mind and your focus in and engaged on the task at hand? So it's those 4 techniques in concert: master internal triggers, make time for traction, hack back external triggers, and prevent distraction with packs. So that's the very big, 30,000 foot overview. Of course, we can dive deeper into anything that's of interest.
Yeah, I love it. I love your work, and I love the way that you take a perspective on things, because I think the most important part of what you just said, and it's not even one of the 4, but it's just taking responsibility, knowing that you have the control. And so much of this podcast was helping people unlearn the beliefs that stop them from creating more. And that is a belief, is simply a belief that we can be distracted, and that's just how life is, and that's just how it's going to happen. But we
Mhm.
have so much more control than we think that we do. What are some other beliefs that stop us from, showing up for the goals that we say that we want to show up for, when our actions and on what we say are just not in alignment?
So much of what we say. I mean, I think it's been said many, many times before, but life isn't about what happens to you; it's how you react to what happens to you. I mean, that's a lesson that I teach my daughter. Actually, we had a lesson the other day where she had a cockroach in her room, and she kind of flipped out about it. And again, she was blaming the cockroach. Well, the cockroach was not the cockroach's fault. It's how she
Yeah.
reacted to that cockroach that matters. And there's lots of cockroaches in life, right? There's lots of bugs. There's lots of things that aren't fun about life. And some people, when they have adversity, when they have difficult situations, they crumble, right? They do self-destructive behaviors, whereas other people rise to the challenge. There's that New Yorker cartoon that is difficult to express in words, but I'll kind of summarize it. Basically, there's 2 guys standing next to each other on the corner, and one is begging for, selling pencils on the corner, begging, and his sign says, "My father was an alcoholic." And then next to him, there's a Wall Street type guy who's got a lot of money and a fancy suit, and he's telling his friend, "My father was an alcoholic." So the same situation. It's how we respond to it, not to minimize anyone's trauma, right? I think obviously a lot of people go through a lot of terrible stuff, but at the end of the day, it's how we respond to those things. Because look, that's what the human species has done forever, right? If you think things are bad now, read a history book, right? This is the best time in history. It's never been better to be a human being. Certainly, if you're lucky enough to be listening to this podcast on a smartphone and you live in an industrialized country, I mean, you won the lottery, right? You are the fraction of 1% of human beings who have ever lived to have this level of comfort, and that's not being elitist. This is just historical facts compared to how most people live, let alone how kings and queens lived just 500 years ago. It's we live better. The average middle class American lives way better than any king and queen did in history 200 years ago and before. So we have a lot going for us. We have to be very, very thankful of that, and realize that these situations are really made of how we respond to them. So what most people do when we have these distractions in our life, they become either what's called a blamer or a shamer. A blamer blames things outside themselves, right? It's social media, it's the news, it's my kids, it's my boss. They blame stuff outside of themselves. But of course, that's futile, because that stuff will always be there. There will always be one distraction or another. Plato, the Greek philosopher, talked about distraction 2,500 years before the internet. So if Plato was talking about distraction 2,500 years ago, the source of the distraction can't be the internet. It
Yeah.
goes way back before. Humans will always get distracted by something. Imagine, let's say Zuckerberg says, "Hey, you know what? I'm shutting down Instagram, and TikTok shuts down, and all social media is banned." You think people are going to go back to reading Chaucer and Shakespeare in their spare time? No, they'll do other stupid stuff to distract them if that's what you're looking for. That's what human beings have always done, except for the wise, right? The wise spend time figuring out how they want to spend their time and attention. They become indistractable. And so that is the skill of the century. So we don't want to be blamers. We also don't want to be shamers. Shamers, they don't blame things outside themselves. They shame themselves. They think that somehow they're defective, they're broken, there's something wrong about them. That's not effective either, because shame is a very uncomfortable internal trigger. So the
Yeah.
more shame we feel, the more we seek to escape shame with, guess what? More distraction. So we don't want to be shamers. We don't want to be blamers. We want to be what's called claimers. Claimers claim responsibility not for how they feel. This is very important. Many people think you need to take responsibility for how you feel. No, that's not true, because you can't take responsibility for something that already happened, right? If it already happened, you can't do anything about it. So think about the urge to sneeze. When you feel the urge to sneeze, it's too late. You can't stop the urge any more than you can stop the urge to check social media or pornography or smoke a cigarette or take a drink or eat a chocolate brownie when you're on a diet. Any of these things that you tell yourself, I don't want to want that thing, that's impossible. You can't stop yourself from wanting those things. What you
Yeah.
can do, you can't control the urge. You can't control the sensation. What you can do is you can control how you will respond to that sensation, hence the term responsibility. Right? So go back to that metaphor I talked about earlier about the urge to sneeze. If you feel the urge to sneeze, what do? Right? In response to that urge to sneeze, you could sneeze all over everyone, or you can take out a Kleenex and you can cover your face, because that's the responsible thing to do. Right?
Yeah.
So that's the same way when it goes to any of our urges, any of these sensations that pull us towards distraction, these internal triggers. You need to have an internal script, just like we have a habit of pulling out a tissue when we're about to have the urge to sneeze so we don't get other people sick. You need to have this habit of knowing, what do I do when I feel this pull towards distraction? That's what mastering internal triggers is all about.
Your mantras are very valuable, and I think they're really, really powerful in overcoming that loop. And that's something that I said that before we hopped on. Like, I'm gonna geek out about all this kind of stuff because this is so much stuff I talk about with clients, and something that I see a lot with clients that I work with is that shame, is that constant loop of, I'm not doing what I said I wanted to do. I know that I really want to show up for my goals, but I just can't get myself to do it, and I stay in this cycle of shame that keeps me in this loop. Do you have like a process to reset, to get out of that, to jump back into things, or what does that look like for you?
Yeah, well, so you need to eliminate that word "can't" for things that you actually can't, right? So if
Sure.
it disobeys the laws of physics, okay, you can't.
Yeah.
I'll agree with you. But if it
Yeah.
doesn't disobey the laws of physics, why can't you? You don't feel like it, right? But that should
Yeah.
be empowering, right? Now it's not a mystery. It's not some evil force, right? It's just a feeling. It's not external. It's internal.
Yeah.
And so that is incredibly important and incredibly empowering. So, reframing these triggers is very, very important. One of the techniques, as I mentioned, there's over a dozen different things you can do. One of the
Yeah.
things you can do is to reimagine the trigger. I'll give you a little anecdote here. For years, I had terrible stage fright, which is not a trait you want for a professional public speaker, but that's true. Every time I would get on stage, I would start getting real nervous. My mouth would get super dry. My pits would get sweaty. I'd start feeling heart palpitations. I'd start getting really nervous, and I would immediately start playing this script of how I probably wasn't ready to go on stage. I should have practiced more. Who do I think I am? I'm going to flub this. If I was a professional, this wouldn't happen. That script wasn't helpful. It was hurtful. And so, what I decided to do after reading the psychology literature about this, I decided to reframe the internal trigger. I started to reimagine it. How did I do that? Now I still get those same physiological reactions, right? I still feel those things, just like if you talk to a client or a friend or maybe yourself, that feeling of I can't, right?
Mhm.
I still feel that, but I have reimagined the trigger. So now, before I get on stage, I still have a dry mouth. I still have sweaty pits. I still have a heart palpitations. But now I've reimagined those triggers. When I feel those internal triggers, I change the story. I say, you see what's happening here? My body is pumping more blood to my brain so that I have enough oxygen in my brain to give the best possible presentation. So this is my body getting ready to do its best. So by
Yeah.
reimagining those internal triggers, reimagining that narrative that we've told ourselves, this is one of many techniques that we can use to start gaining greater control over those internal triggers so they don't control us.
Yeah, I think it's really, really valuable. The mindset shift that I take is, it's not anxiety, but it's excitement. And
Yeah.
I have a client that's a music artist, and it was when we first started working together, it was him getting him on stages, and it was the same kind of thing. And it was like, it's the story that you're telling yourself that holds so many of us back. And that's why I love talking about the belief systems around like being distracted or believing that we can't get out of our own way, because we get so caught in these cycles internally that we think it's all external. We feel like it's our environment. We feel like it's so many different things. And I think a habit that a lot of us get caught in is we can be disciplined in certain areas, but we'll be undisciplined in other areas. So, say for
Yeah.
example, I go to the gym first thing in the morning, and it's just a part of who I am at this point. But like I said, some things that are for work, they'll be the most important thing, and I'll neglect them and I'll focus on the little things. So for people that are out there that are struggling to show up for the big things, but they are still showing up for other things, where do you kind of find that balance between showing up for both, if that makes sense?
Yeah, so it has to do with how difficult that task is.
Mm.
And so this is why, you probably, I hate to degrade other people's work and theories, but this is where I take issue with flow. You've heard the idea of
Mihai
flow.
Csikszentmihalyi. Yep.
Yeah, Mihai Csikszentmihalyi. If you actually read his work, it's actually not as bad as how people have it. His work is pretty good. What's happened is that people who haven't really read his work have extrapolated things he never said.
Yeah.
They make flow, and to some degree habits actually as well, into this magical tool that you can use to do things you don't want to do, right? Like habits. This is perfect. When someone says, "Oh, I want to get into a habit of something," or just make it a habit, or 18 habits that you should adopt. What they are actually saying is, I don't want to do that thing. I want to have done that thing, right?
Mm.
Just get into flow. Right, so
Yeah.
easy, right? But that's not what actually the literature on flow says. Flow is about things that people already enjoy doing, right? If you read Csikszentmihalyi, he talks about people who are playing basketball and surfers and painters, people doing things they really enjoy doing. That's
Yeah.
when they get into that magical state. I don't know how to get into flow when I'm doing my taxes. I don't believe you can,
Me either.
right? Same with habits, right? Habits are, what's the definition of a habit? A habit is a behavior done with little or no conscious thought. Journaling ain't a habit. Okay. Meditating is not a habit. Why? Because if you're meditating with little or no conscious thought, you're asleep. You're
Yeah.
doing it wrong. Meditating is about bringing conscious thought to your present state, right? Writing, journaling, you can't get into a writing habit. I wish. I've written 2 bestsellers, thousands of articles. It's always hard. It's never a habit because it's difficult. I have to think in order to do it well. Same with exercise. So my work is really about helping people do the things that are difficult for them to do, but they want to do anyway in order to move their life forward. So if for some people going to the gym is fun, it's easy. They don't have to, it's not difficult, but getting off social media is really hard. For other
Yeah.
people, I don't really care about social media, but working out is really hard. It has to do with their level of comfort with discomfort. But that's a macro skill. You can,
Mhm.
as opposed to being, hey, really disciplined in one area and really not disciplined in another, what you can actually do is to learn this macro skill of dealing with discomfort in a helpful rather than harmful way. And that's going to benefit every area of your life.
Yeah. I, again, I love all of this because it's so, most of us aren't aware of this. Like you said, you came into this space because you didn't see anything out there that was talking about so much of this. And I know that a big part of it is our emotional dysregulation is where a lot of this stems from. A lot of the procrastination, a lot of the fear, a lot of all of that kind of stuff. So can you dive into where that starts for most of us and where we can start to interrupt it? And I assume that it has to do with the internal triggers as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's what all those internal triggers are about is having this one awareness of those
Yeah.
internal triggers. So that's a big one that many people, they want to blame the news, they want to blame booze, they want to blame football, they want to blame Facebook, they want to blame stuff outside themselves when
Yeah.
really if you don't understand the root cause, right? If you don't really understand that the reason you are being taken off track from what you really want to do, what you later will look back and regret, if you don't understand that feeling, if you can't name that feeling, you're always going to get distracted. So that's why the first step is bringing awareness to what is that sensation. And then if you can just write it down, right? Literally just writing down what is that sensation, anxiety, stress, uncertainty, fatigue, writing it down is hugely powerful. Then what you can do is you can start employing many of the techniques I talk about in the book. One technique I use almost every single day is called the 10-minute rule. And the
Yeah.
10-minute rule says that you can give in to any distraction. Any distraction. You want to go online, you want to look at porn, you want to smoke a cigarette, you want to eat that chocolate chip cookie, whatever it is that you're trying not to do, you can give into it, but not right now. You can give into it in 10 minutes. Okay, not right now. I choose to do it in 10 minutes. Now, why is this so important? It's important to take a little detour here to discuss what oftentimes happens when we tell ourselves what to do and why abstinence tends not to work. Okay, strict abstinence, like the 1980s style, just say no to drugs, why that failed is because saying no to something elicits what we call psychological reactance. Psychological reactance is this phenomenon whereby when you are told what to do, when your autonomy and agency is threatened, you will rebel. So if you've ever had a boss that micromanaged you, if you've ever been told by your mom when you were a kid to put on a coat, it's cold outside, you said, no, don't tell me what to do, right? That's reactance. Now, the crazy thing is that you will feel reactance even if you are telling yourself what to do.
Mm.
Right? That's how weird the human brain is. That even though you're
Yeah.
telling yourself what to do, you will also potentially elicit psychological reactance. So the way to disarm that reactance is one to realize that, especially when it comes to things that we can't escape, right? Like if you're on a diet, you can't stop eating, right?
Yeah.
Technology, you can't stop using tech. It's not realistic. Now, sometimes abstinence is a good idea. For example, if you're trying to kick an addictive substance, for example, well, sometimes changing your environment and going cold turkey can be the right way to go for some people in some situations. But where you cannot remove the triggers, right? You can't remove technology, you can't remove food. It's very difficult to do. Giving yourself that autonomy and saying, "Hey, I'm an adult. I can do whatever I want, but I choose to wait 10 minutes until I give in." And so what you're going to do is to simply set a timer for 10 minutes and you have a choice to make. There's a fork in the road. You can either get back to the task at hand. So for me, it might be writing or whatever the case might be. When I'm writing, all I want to do is check email or look at the news or watch a YouTube video or whatever the case might be. And I tell myself, okay, I'm not going to do that right now. I'm going to get back to the writing, or I can simply surf the urge. Now, surfing the urge acknowledges that these emotions are like waves. They crest and then they subside. So if you can simply surf the urge, surf that emotion for just a few minutes, like a surfer on a surfboard, what you will find is that those emotions are always temporary. Now, this is one of the biggest psychological illusion that tricks us. We believe, you talked about self-limiting beliefs. We believe that whatever we feel right now is the way we will continue to feel,
Yeah.
right? When you feel sad, you think you're always going to feel sad. When you feel hunger, the hunger's never going to end. When you feel stressed, you can't see the light at the tunnel of when you're ever going to feel unstressed, right? You always feel, you think it's going to last forever, but of course that's ridiculous. We know logically it will end, but you don't feel that way, right? Like,
Yeah.
nobody was ever calmed down by being told calm down. It doesn't work that way. It's very hard to shake an emotion once you are feeling it. So if you can just ride out that sensation, take a deep breath, repeat a mantra, right? For me, I have a personal mantra. Whenever I do this exercise, I repeat to myself, this is what it feels like to get better. This is what it feels like to get better. And just saying that mantra, taking a few deep breaths, that itch, that response, that desire to go get distracted by checking social media or whatever the case might be, if I just give it a little bit of time, I ride it like a wave, it crests and then it dies down. And then what I find is I'll get right back to that task at hand. Now, if I still want to do that distraction, fine. But what you find is that you are proving to yourself, you're showing yourself, hey, I can do this, right? Because you can do anything for 10 minutes, right? Like we said earlier, if I said, hey, don't check social media for 10 minutes, don't eat the chocolate cake for 10 minutes, don't smoke the cigarette for 10 minutes. And if you do, you're going to have to pay me $10,000. You're not going to do it,
Yeah.
right? So you can
Yeah.
do pretty much anything for 10 minutes or resist doing anything for 10 minutes. If you can do that, what you're going to show yourself is, wait a minute, I did it for 10 minutes and that wasn't that hard. I wonder if I can do
Yeah.
it for 11 minutes or 12 minutes or 15 minutes or 20 minutes. And so that 10-minute rule starts being extended further out and you're proving to yourself, hey, actually, I do have the agency to do what I say I'm going to do. And so over time, you're going to build that capacity.
It's building the relationship with yourself, right? At the end of the day, you have to prove to yourself that you can do the thing. And once you prove it a little bit more and you prove it a little bit more. And you were speaking about the 10-minute rule. I think there's a part that I think is really valuable where as we schedule time for work, we should also schedule time for procrastination. It's like giving us almost a permission to do so that allows us to be intentional when we are working and we have that less of an urge. Do you align with that?
It depends how you define procrastination,
Mhm.
because it's different people interpret procrastination different ways. I mean, You can delay it. Procrastination always has a negative connotation.
Of
Procrastination
course,
is when you say you're going to do one thing and then you delay it despite having the intent to do it.
of
So
course.
that's a little bit different. I don't see like a positive side to procrastination. What I do see a positive side to is prioritization.
Yeah,
Right? There's nothing wrong with saying I don't want to do this task today because it's not that important.
hmm,
Therefore, I'm going to schedule it for a future date. That's totally fine. That's good prioritization. What I don't want people to do is to say I don't feel like doing this right now, even though I
yeah,
plan to do it, so I'm not going to do it. Then we get into trouble, right? Then we start delaying working on that term paper, or we start delaying working on that big business project, or we delay going to the gym, and then we don't end up doing it, or we cram at the last minute, and we know our performance is much worse than it would be had we properly planned for the task. So there's nothing wrong with saying, hey, that thing I was going to do tomorrow, I'm going to delay, right? Because that's in the future. But
of
what
course.
I don't want you to do is that once you set that schedule and say, I plan to do this task, this is how I want to spend my time according to my values, then you have to stick to it. Then it's time boxed.
Yeah, because then you're breaking your promises to yourself, and then your self-respect depletes, and then your ability to show up for yourself depletes, and just a continuous cycle. And I think for a lot of people, that's where they're starting is in that cycle. And
Right.
where do you think most people go wrong when it comes to, I guess, trying to break bad habits, becoming more indistractable? Where do you think people go wrong when they try to do so?
It depends very much on the individual,
Of course.
where they might be limited. I mean, the biggest mistake is believing you're powerless. I think that's
Yeah.
such a pervasive narrative these days that, frankly, is very comfortable. Right? It's like a nice warm blanket of not having to take responsibility for your actions.
Yeah.
Right? It's somebody else doing it to me, and that's the biggest problem. But of course, this is a huge potential advantage for people who are listening, right? Is to do what other people don't do, right? If you want to have things that other people don't have, if you want to live a life that other people don't live, you have to do things that other people don't do. You have to be a little weird, right? Everybody who moves the world forward, they are doing something a little bit against the grain, right?
Yeah.
They're doing something counter to the masses and this messaging that I think we're all hearing loud and clear from the media these days of, be passive. There's nothing you can do. The system is stacked against you. The media, all this messaging, I think lulls a lot of people into passivity, and I think that's unnecessary. That the people who will make the future are the people who are able to control their time and their attention.
Yeah. The intentionality is something that's so important. And I think if we're not living with intention each and every single day, it's not that we're wasting our time, but it's almost like we're gonna get to the end of our life with regret. And I think for so many of us, it's the unfortunate truth that most people get to the end of their life with that. And outside of time blocking, where do you feel people can optimize for a life of more intention, if that makes sense?
Right. So that's where these four techniques should be used
Of
in
course.
concert. So, number one, make sure you master the internal triggers. Number two, make sure you make time for traction. And you do that by
Yeah.
assessing your values. So, there's these three life domains that I help people work through of you're at the center of these three life domains, then your relationships, and then finally your work. Right. So, by
Yeah.
looking at these three life domains and asking yourself, how would the person I want to become spend their time? Not what do I want to do? What do I want to finish? What do I want to accomplish? That will come later. The most important thing is to plan the input of your time and attention. So I show you exactly how to turn your values into time. Then the third step of hacking back these external triggers. So that's very important, right? There's all these external triggers that we don't have to be powerless to, right? Of course, take 5 minutes and change a few settings on your phone, right? Like it takes just seconds to do, but most people don't do it.
Yeah.
Making sure that when you call a meeting in your company, that you're calling your meeting for the right reasons. Many people don't understand what the purpose of a meeting actually is. They think it's for brainstorming. Terrible, right? There's all these things that we do inside meetings that make them a big waste of time. And then finally, and to prevent distraction with pacts by erecting this firewall. And I show you, how can you make commitments. There's these three types of pacts: a price pact, an effort pact, and an identity pact that you can use to make sure that you keep yourself in to the task at hand.
I love that you brought up the inputs versus outputs because so many of us focus on the outputs and we don't focus on the actions that are actually going to get us there. And I think for so many, especially as an entrepreneur, when you're really scheduling out your day, you're figuring out what is the most important thing that I should work on. I think it's something that a lot of us struggle with. How can we find more balance in, not putting off our goals, but also still focusing on the intention of what we actually have to do?
So that's where it's not about finishing the task. It's about making sure that you put the time with the inputs of the task.
Yeah.
So one of the things I hate about the to-do list method is that people measure themselves simply by the output, right?
Yeah.
To-do lists are nothing more than a register of outputs. It's all the things you want to have finished. But it's kind of ridiculous to plan output without input. If you go to the baker and you say, hey, I'm going to need a dozen cupcakes for a birthday party, the baker's going to say, okay, well, I need butter, I need flour, I need sugar, I need all this input to make the output. But when
Yeah.
it comes to white collar workers, right, when it comes to knowledge workers, our input is not sugar and flour and butter. It's time and attention. It's just those two critical resources. So we have to plan for our time and attention because you can't get output without the input. So instead of what most people do, if they even use a time management technique, if they use a to-do list, just using the to-do list is a huge mistake. There's all kinds of problems with using a to-do list. Mostly, and by the way, just to clarify, there's nothing wrong with taking things out of your brain and putting them on a piece of paper. That's a very good idea, or in an app. That's fine. But what most people do who keep a to-do list, they don't then move those tasks for when they will work on those tasks into their calendar.
Hmm.
That's a huge mistake. So what I want people to do is to stop measuring themselves by how many cute little boxes they check off, and rather measure themselves by one thing, and that is, did I do what I said I was going to do for as long as I said I would without distraction? That's the only criteria that matters. Why? Because then you will have a feedback system to know how long things take you, right? What most people do, if they have a to-do list, they work on, task number one for 5 minutes. It gets a little difficult. Okay, let me just check email real quick. Let me just go do this one thing. Let me go gossip a bit. I'll do that, the other. And then they work on it in fits and starts, and they waste so much time getting back into the mental state of doing
Yeah.
that task optimally. As opposed to if you say, hey, I am going to do nothing but work on this particular task without distraction. I don't care if I finish. I'm going to work on it without distraction. Now you have a feedback loop. You said, okay, well, I'm working on this big presentation. It has to be 20 slides. And in 30 minutes, I did one slide. Okay, well, then that means I need 20 more time boxes of 30 minutes to finish the whole task. You cannot do that with traditional to do lists. You have to use this time box methodology in order to start giving yourself a feedback loop to know how long things take you.
So important. I think so many of us are doing reactive work and we're not doing reflective work where we
Right.
can't we can't get clear on how long things take, on what we need to focus on all these things. And I'm so grateful that you bring that in there. Near, there's one last question I ask every single
Sure.
guest and encapsulates what I want to do with this podcast. And it's what belief are you currently unlearning?
Interesting you ask. So I'm doing a lot of research into placebos and
Mm.
nocebos. And so there's all kinds of beliefs that I'm trying to unlearn around pain. Like, so Indestructible focuses a lot about psychological discomfort. Now
Yes.
I'm starting to explore physiological discomfort. And it's really interesting how what I thought was a clear line between physical and psychological pain turns out to be a very gray space. That it turns out that the brain and the beliefs that we have about discomfort greatly affect our perception of pain. So I'm trying to unlearn pain behaviors when it comes to physiological pain right now. But I'll tell you how that goes in a few years. I'm still working on the book.
Yeah, yeah, I'll be here for it, and we'll do another interview then because it's I know it's going to be amazing, and that's something that I've dove a lot into with Joe Dispenza and Nicole Pires, a lot of their work, where it is so powerful how our beliefs really shape the way that we act in the world, the way that we feel in the world, the way that we show up in the world. And yeah, I'm so grateful for you coming on the show. All your links of your books and everything will be in the show notes, and thank you so much for taking the time.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.